This episode is sponsored by Law Tigers New Mexico. Law Tigers New Mexico have been fighting insurance companies on your behalf since 2001. With Law Tigers, you never ride alone.
Welcome back to the Rust is Gold Racing Podcast. This is episode 66. We have a flat track related podcast today, which is something that we're excited about because we are moving into that season right now, aren't we, Thaison?
Yeah, I can't wait. I mean, I couldn't wait at the end of the last race of the season. I was like, okay, cool. Give myself a month or two to get my bikes back in order, go through all the maintenance, give myself some time to rest. And after like a month, I was ready to get back out on the track. Yeah. So I'm excited. I've been fiending for it in a weird way.
Fiending?
I'm like an addict.
Dude, you're like a flat track fiend?
I'm a flat track
down
addict.
The way, not too far, an old time rockabilly coffee bar, wrecking machine tucked in the back, Elvis singing about a Cadillac. I'm on a BSA, been riding all day, leathers on, goggles too, triumphant, I don't know what you wanna do. My boys are on Ducatis, happen now all the while, yeah, these new rockers exist style. So let's ride, so let's ride, so let's ride.
Not that I condone any sort of addiction.
Motorcycle addiction.
Motorcycle addiction isn't bad, but it can go south very fast, as you know.
I'm starting to feel it.
If you look in both of our garages,
yes,
we've already gone south. But I just finished working on that little Yamaha 360. Got the glass all finished, the paint, the tail section, the seat. Kind of redoing all the fuel lines, and I'm ready to rip that bike. I'm excited.
It's looking good.
And that was a fun bike just to work on. Everything kind of came together nice and easy. Whereas like my Husky on the other hand is not.
Yeah. I mean, look, we've been talking about doing this desert race for like a year.
Yeah.
Seriously, it's been a year now. And we're like, okay, we're going to get some cool vintage bikes to do desert racing. We'll build them out. And that's taken us the longest, I think, out of any of our builds.
Yeah.
The dirt bikes.
The CR250 Husky. I think I've been on this one for about 6 months now.
It's been a while.
So if we were one of those reality shows, I would have missed the deadline.
Big time.
The show would have been canceled because of this bike. But it's just one of those bikes where nothing is coming together right. And it happens ever so often, but this has definitely been my Achilles heel of bikes because it's so hard to find parts for these vintage Huskies. Whereas, like a Yamaha, it's super easy to get parts on. No big deal. Even Triumph's easy to get parts for. This thing has just been kind of a nightmare, but it'll get there, slow and steady.
Always does.
Slow and steady, man. So again, now that Flat Track is coming up, I'm excited for our next guest. We've had a couple publication companies on our podcast, and this one it's a really cool magazine. And I think if I would have looked at this magazine, 5 years ago when we were kind of more into like cafes and custom builds, it wouldn't have really registered with me. And probably. I was thinking about that when I was kind of re-looking at these magazines from Sideburn. I was looking at them and I was like, oh, wow, look at how look at the tail section or the size of the tire or the stance on this bike. And so, yeah, now it's just everything kind of like clicks, and I understand why you use a certain tire and why one peg is going to be up a little bit different. Or you can look at a bike now in a build and you can say, okay, I get the purpose behind these builds. Yeah. Whereas before, it wouldn't have made sense to me per se.
Well, I'm interested to hear what he has to say. This is Gary Inman from Sideburn Magazine out of the UK, because flat track is not a big thing in the UK.
Well, I mean, it's not a big thing in comparison to like motocross or even GP. It was a big sport. And this is the sad thing, I think, as we look at like both of us being kind of nostalgic of the past and the history of motorcycles, we look at the history of motorcycles and we can start to see a resurgence in desert racing a little bit. We can see GP it's one of the biggest sports in the world. There's races all over Qatar to Austin. And when we look at motocross, we see all these huge sponsors, and motocross, the stands are filled, and when we look at flat track, we can look at it and say, okay, in the 70s and 80s was a heyday, you know what I mean? And even board tracking back before that. Now when we look at it, it's tough to even draw crowds. The professionals with Indian and sometimes Harley, it's like you look at those stands and they're semi-filled.
It's true.
And I don't know, it's kind of a weird thing because we're right in the middle of this kind of like iceberg that's, you know, kind of starting to melt and reveal itself. And I hope, you know, as we're both like historians and we love motorcycles, I hope we start to see resurgence for this sport.
Cool. Well, let's see what Gary has to say. We're going to give him a call right now. And just so that our listeners know, Gary's actually in the UK right now, and I think it's like 8 o'clock or something over there. And we're here in the States, in the Southwest, and it's 1 p.m. on a Sunday. So Gary, thanks for joining us, Gary. We really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for inviting me on. Yeah, it's very wet and wild here in the UK. We keep getting hit by storm after storm, and another one's coming in at the moment. But I'm in my office at the moment, and the hatches are battened down, so everything's okay.
Well, not to make you feel bad, but we're at a balmy, probably 60 degrees right here in the Southwest, beautiful desert riding weather.
And you're in Albuquerque, right?
That's correct.
Great.
Gary, the way we kind of usually like to start these off is, you know, and we'll talk about your magazine and your publication here in a few, but when did you first get into motorcycles?
When I was 16, well, just before I was 16. That's the legal riding age in the UK. My father was a motorcyclist, but I'm the youngest of 5 kids, so the bikes went long before I came on the scene to pay for kids and families and all that. But my dad had some very cool bikes, including Vincent's, that one of which he bought directly from the factory, and he had that when he was in the military over here. And then when I was 15, 16, there was a big cultural movement over here of scooter boys, which was off the back of mods, but a very different thing. And there were a few guys around where I lived and where I went to school that had Vespas and Lambrettas, and I just thought this was cool. There was a lot of tough kids riding around on these scooters, and I thought, oh yeah, I want some of that. There wasn't a big motorcycle culture in the area that I grew up in at the time.
I got to ask you really quickly. Steve and I both started off, I mean, obviously dirt biking, but then we both got into like the rocker cafe scene pretty heavily for a long time. And I think a lot of people associate, when they go back to looking at the history of cafe racers, they go back to England always as the mecca, the home ship of it. So I guess there is a kind of a dividing line between obviously rockers, in our opinion, or idea of rockers and mods. Was that still the same way it was for you growing up in England?
Yeah, very much so. But there was even a dividing line between scooters, between scooter boys and mods. Not wanting to get too far off the subject, but the scooter boys were more like football hooligans, and the mods were more stylish. The scooter boys were more punky and psychobilly. I don't know if you know those kind of cultures over there, and you know, anarchic almost, and a lot more about the machinery, whereas mods over here were more about the whole lifestyle, and the scooter was just a part of a wider lifestyle that was music and clothing. To the scooter boys, the machine was everything.
Interesting.
And it didn't matter if you turned up in a leather jacket or a MA1 pilot jacket or a miner's donkey jacket or whatever you turned up on. It didn't matter. It was the scooter that was the defining thing, whereas with mods and rockers, there was much more of a uniform.
Wow. That's pretty cool. I never heard that,
I
the
haven't
Scooter
either.
Boys, and that's pretty interesting to hear that there was actually another subculture within that subculture, which is it's kind of exciting, actually.
It was a big scene for a short time. It was a massive scene, and like with every scene, it hangs on and it hangs on, and there's a lot of people my age and older who are still into the scene, but very few younger ones have come underneath. So that was that. And so there was a two-wheel, love. I made a deal that I was with myself that I would ride every day of the year, which is quite a commitment in an inclement, environment over here. It rains a lot through winter. It's pretty miserable through winter over here. And then, so I totally fell in love with two wheels. I fell in love with the customization of two wheels, and one thing led to another. And after a couple of years and being introduced actually to sports bike magazines, one in particular called Performance Bikes, which was a very influential magazine over here. I ended up buying a Honda CBR 600 when I was about 20, 21, something like that. And then got deeper into bikes, and I still own a scooter. I'm looking at one now in my office that I've had for over 30 years and rode all over the country and to Europe and things like that. But motorbikes then were the thing, and it went from just having a sports bike to wanting a street fighter. I don't know how familiar you are with that scene over in America, but street fighter was another thing that wasn't that far away from the scooter boy thing, really. It was working class guys totally chopping up and changing the machinery that they had, that they'd fallen in love with, but instead of it being 200cc Vespas and Lambrettas, it was 1100cc GSXR.
The street fighter scene here in the US is huge. Naked bikes and street fighters. I mean, that's kind of the thing right now. Production bikes are coming out that way now, already stripped down. Street Fighter.
Well, I ended up working for a magazine called Street Fighters, which coined the phrase that people didn't call those bikes street fighters before this magazine came along. It grew out of a chopper magazine called Backstreet Heroes. And one of the journalists there started noticing this culture of bikes, of these crashed GSXRs that people couldn't afford to fix the fairings on them. So they'd take the fairings off, they'd they'd fit twin rally headlights to the front and motocross bars, and make this new flavor, this new genre of bike. And he started calling them, he's a journalist called Klink, who I got to know very well because I worked on the magazine, and he was the first person to coin the phrase street fighter. And it came off the back of I'm pretty sure I've got this right, off the back of Rolling Stones song Street Fighting Man.
I didn't know
That's
that.
pretty cool.
Yeah, I didn't
He
know
used that, and then they started featuring them in the Chopper magazine, this custom bike magazine, and the scene grew so quickly, and the publishers were so hip to it that they made a Street Fighters magazine, and that magazine went on to be published for 15 or more years. And that was the first thing I think I was ever published in a magazine. I'd written something for a scooter mag, but the first thing I wrote about motorbikes was for Street Fighters, and then I ended up getting a job there, and one thing led to another.
So you've been writing.
Long time later.
You've been writing most of your life, then, I guess, right? Since your early teens.
No, I was an engineer. Riding or writing.
No, sorry, writing. Yeah, being a journalist.
No, I've been a journalist since my mid-20s. I was an engineer, a draftsman before that, engineering drawing. So that was my original background. And then I started writing for a local paper. And in fact, I just found the paperwork the other day. It was surprising how just the technology back there, compared to now.
Right.
I remember doing a report from a show, a big trade show, and I had to go into a phone box and ring up someone at the newspaper and talk my story down the phone to someone who was typing it so it could go in the paper the next day. Pre-email, anything like that. I've been doing this a long time.
So I'm guessing when you're working as an engineer, did you always just kind of have a passion for writing, and then did writing eventually turn into a passion where you could figure out how to mold the two with motorcycles?
Exactly. That is exactly right. Well, the writing, and then the thing was, how can I ride these bikes that I cannot afford to insure? So I wrote to a local paper and said, look, there's this thing happening, born again bikers. There's, at the time in the mid 90s, that was a big thing or early 90s, that was a big thing in Britain, of these born again bikers, older chaps, in their 30s and 40s at that time, who'd ridden when they were kids on 125s and 250s, but then had got families and had got money and come back to biking and were buying Fireblades and ZZR 1100s and things like this. This all predates the adventure bike boom. This is
sure
sort of early 90s. So I started writing about just borrowing bikes from local dealers and using the paper's name to do that, and and then writing just short reports for the local paper and getting paid £25, which is sort of $40, but not caring and not even remembering how much I got paid. But being paid to do this was quite a big thing. I'm sure if I look, but I didn't actually read what I wrote back then because it was probably quite derivative of what I was reading myself. But the newspaper seemed happy with it, so that suited me.
It's content, right? Motorcycle content.
Well, we're gonna. There's so much interesting stuff to talk about that I think we're probably going to have to make some leaps here just to kind of cover a lot of the cool stuff that you've done. But now I know that Sideburn started in 2008, right? Is this the first project that you started yourself?
Yes. I'd worked in magazines since the mid 90s. I think about 95. I left engineering and went full time working for Street Fighters, and then moved around a few jobs. And then by around 2000, I decided that I wanted to go freelance because I didn't want to be an editor, even though I am now, but I wanted to be out writing and experiencing stuff and interviewing people. I didn't want to be back at the office sending other people out on these great assignments that I'd thought up. I wanted to be doing them myself. So it was a very good time compared to now to be a freelance journalist. It was, I had an experience, I had some contacts, so I could do things like borrow a bike. One example, I borrowed a Benelli TNT when they first came out, which is, I don't know if you know it, but it's Italian triple mad looking street fighter at the time, very radical looking bike. And I convinced Benelli to let me ride one halfway down Africa. So I picked it up in Spain, even though they're Italian. They got it to Spain. I flew into Spain, picked up the bike. a photographer who I worked with and still work with from time to time, James Cheadle, bought an old Mercedes saloon. He picked that up in England. He drove all the way through France, all the way through Spain. We met in southern Spain and then crossed the ferry to Morocco, rode through Morocco, through Mauritania, through Senegal and to Gambia on this bike, riding through the Sahara on this factory street fighter. And when I got back, I managed to sell that story all around the world. And it was, it earned us good money and it was an incredible experience. So I could do things like that, and I could interview racers and sell it 2 or 3 times, and I was supplying Cycle World in the US when it was the biggest motorbike magazine in the world. I was working for the biggest magazine in Britain, big magazines in Germany and France, Spain, sometimes Japan. And it was a good time. Greece, Portugal, all these places. So it was a really good time. And then kept that going with other bits and pieces, not just writing about bikes, but concentrating on bikes. And then it got to the point where I thought, I want to do something myself. And one thing led to another, and I decided I wanted to do a little magazine. I was inspired by another magazine that I think you'll be familiar with, Dice magazine.
Yeah.
Which had launched in the UK a few years before. That's before they moved. The guys who launched it moved out to Los Angeles, and I just saw this magazine. I thought, wow, this is a totally different way of doing it. It's a fanzine feel to it. It didn't have. It wasn't playing by any of the magazine rules that I learned and thought were really important. It just did its own thing, and that was a big influence for Sideburn. Just do your own thing.
There's it seems like that was kind of the perfect time for a lot of these independent magazines to kind of start coming out, like you just mentioned. I mean, you had Sideburn, yours, that came out, and we see things like Dice or Meta, all these kind of, magazines that are not exactly like the old school antique motorcycle world or cycle world in that degree, where it's just talking about CCs and displacement. They're starting to get into nice photography and good layouts that kind of capture the eye. So you kind of, like, without no pun intended, you kind of slid in at that right time, correct?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. Dice definitely paved the way. There was Greasy Culture. There were pure fanzines like Motorcycle out of Canada. That was much more of a fanzine than a glossy magazine. But the magazines at that time, pre-social media, were the things that were leading and far more influential. I just remember that people were seeing what we were reflecting and thinking, oh yeah, I love that. All I've ever seen. All you could do was just pick up little bits and pieces off the internet, and then blogs came along. Blogs became really important and started growing these scenes globally, and that's just been completely turbocharged and more than that, really. I think it's turned too far, and the culture's almost eating itself now with the way that social media accelerates things so quickly that before anything's had chance to germinate, it's already been burnt out and copied 15 times all around the world. And it's hard to see who to to see who's being really original, because things just get copied so quickly.
Yeah, one of the interesting things I think about your magazine, and now talking to you a little bit, I understand why it looks the way it does. I was surprised at how flat track dirt bike scrambler it was coming from, and I don't mean you to take this the wrong way, but from a rider in the UK. Because naturally we assume, especially here in the US, that it's going to be a cafe racer, vintage bike looking sort of magazine, right? But you've got this really cool take on the whole flat track and scrambler and street tracker thing, which is, it's nice. And it's got a very DIY feel to it, where it's not super glossy, like you said, but it's got like a real, like, tangible feel to it. Like
there's a theme,
but it also feels like Thaison could be in this, or I could be in this, because it's got a real rider sort of feel. It's not hyper stylized.
Well, there's a few things there. There was a gap to talk about flat track. I loved the aesthetic, and you can't talk about dirt track or flat track, whichever you prefer, without talking about On Any Sunday. And that made such an impression on me, because the graphical nature of it all, and how it was so foreign, literally foreign, to someone growing up in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And the speed and the drama and the leathers and the numbers and the bikes looking so tough and so just like traditional motorcycles, but then so pared back. I just loved everything about it.
Right.
And a racer in the UK called Peter Boast had fallen in love with it years before me, and he had been to America to race, and he'd built his own dirt track bikes, and then he launched a series over here, just totally not on a whim, because he thought about it, but he hadn't. There was no culture of it here, none at all, nothing.
I was going to say that was going to be my question. There was.
Yeah.
There's no reference for you there, really, right?
No, not. There's no. Not only is there no reference, there's no secondhand bikes to buy. So anything that you need to do, you've got to do yourself, or you've got to import it from the US. And there were a couple of people who'd bought bikes just because they'd fallen in love with the bikes, and they had them. There was nowhere for them to use them. There was no tracks that would allow them to ride, because there's a speedway culture over here, and that's a lot of the tracks that we ride are speedway short tracks, is what the Americans would call them, the short track. But they couldn't get their bikes on them because there was nothing, there were no practice days for them to go to. So he made this series, which has then spawned and fed back to the US a culture that it's incredible, really, that he had this idea to do it, and that it worked. And he'd organized, I want to say 2 or 3 races. I think I went to the second one, and I met someone there who had a great looking Rotax framer, so a 600 air-cooled single. And I asked him what his racing experience was and how he got into it, and he didn't have any experience. He'd just fallen in love with these kinds of bikes. Heard that there was a series, bought a bike on a whim straight away, turned up and give it a go. And I thought, right, well, if you can do it, I can do it. And I ended up buying a bike a few weeks later off the guy who was organising the series, Peter Boast, and that was around 2005, so going on for 16 years ago. And out of that, Sideburn grew. So it was out of my racing and my love of these people and what they were doing. There were little pockets all over Europe, and when I say little pockets, I mean 2 or 3 people.
Wow.
There was a couple of Italian guys, there were a couple of Dutch guys, There was a guy in Switzerland, and that was it. And then about 15, 20 in the UK that Peter had managed to cajole and convince to come and keep his series going.
So I've got to ask you then, just because I like to understand perspective and history, how many actual semi-professional tracks do they actually have in England then, short or flat track?
So there would be speedway tracks, and they're closing at an alarming rate over here, because there was, after World War II, there was an enormous boom in the interest in speedway racing, speedway motorcycle racing. And it was the second biggest spectator sport in the UK after football, soccer.
Wow.
So there were tracks, and different to the US, speedway in the US, which is, it has a bit of a foothold out in California. Over here, it's a team game, not an individual. It's mainly a team game. So towns and cities would have their own teams and play against each other like baseball or football teams do for you.
Wow.
And they go up and down leagues. So the cities all over England and Scotland would have their own teams. But as the sport has died somewhat in the UK over the years, the land that these tracks were on has been built up around and around, and the noise of speedway bikes puts people off. So they campaign against the tracks being able to run. So that makes it hard for the track owners to earn money. So they end up selling their land to developers. So in a very long way, tracks are closing at quite a rate, but there's probably, I'd like to say, 12, 15 tracks in the UK. And then there's a couple of horse tracks that we could use, but one that we do use in South Wales and one that we have used in North Wales, but they're quite expensive to use. Long answer, about 12 tracks.
Well, I mean, it sounds like at this point, I mean, I know that's happening in parts of the U.S. too, like California and the East Coast. Because of ordinances, a lot of these tracks have to close. But for places like us in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where it's still pretty, sparse and there is available land, we can have a track here, or Texas or Oklahoma, places like that, or Arizona. But I'm guessing for you guys, it sounds like it's, you really have to have a testament of people that are diehard in this sport to keep it alive. You're up against the wave, I guess, right?
Yeah, and it doesn't matter how diehard you are, because land is so scarce. Land that you can build on is so scarce in the UK, and so in demand for housing, that the developers just come in and offer to buy the land, and it's just a no-brainer for the track owners.
Yeah. Do you think there's going to be an upside or a change to that at all, or do you think it's only going to, in the UK, continue to get harder and harder for the sport?
I think unfortunately it's only going to get harder. I've heard rumors of another track that we use a lot going at the end of this year. But, it's not all doom and gloom, because there's a track that the British riders love called Greenfield, and that's a new track to us that was built on farmland by a young farmer who's a very, very keen and very skilled racer. And he talked his parents into, he's in his 20s, he talked his parents into allowing him to use some of the farmland to build a track.
Those are the young kids we like to hear about, man.
Yeah.
Hey, so am I correct in understanding that you are in Lincolnshire?
Yes, I am. And Greenfield's in Lincolnshire as well.
That's what I was going to ask you.
And the guy who I mentioned earlier, Peter Boast, he's in Lincolnshire as well. And yeah, there's quite a big culture of it here. That's probably a lot of it has stemmed from Peter Boast.
That's pretty cool.
It's quite a rural It's quite a rural county.
Yeah. I was going to ask if that's where the track was located. So that's awesome. So I would imagine then you being based out of there and the magazine that you publish being based out of there, I imagine you're a pretty popular guy there with the racers.
Well, it's quite a big, because the UK isn't huge, it's, I don't know off the top of my head, but it's smaller than California, I'm pretty sure. And there's 60 odd million of us all packed into it, that people will travel from all over the UK. And then before COVID, we were having people traveling from Spain and France and Germany all to race with us in the DTRA, the Dirt Track Riders Association Championship, because it was and is the premier championship in Europe, possibly outside the US. I know that the FIM have got a series as well that's international in Europe, but it doesn't seem to be getting the same traction. So I might be partisan here, but the DTRA is a big, very influential and very well run amateur racing club. We're not partisan along county lines like perhaps you are in the US with people from California and Texas. It's a big deal to go out of their state to race somewhere else. If you're in the middle of Texas, it's a hell of a drive to race in Illinois or wherever.
Sure.
Our national series, everyone comes to it. You commit to it and you do all the 6 races.
Then I guess that leads us into the next question of your magazine has so much content and so many different locations, from the US to Europe to, South America. How do you get all this content? Do you have photographers and writers from all over the globe?
Well, we have contributors, but we don't, because photography's been so democratized by digital photography. It would be a very different case if this were in the days of print photography, like it was when I started out, because it was just so much more expensive, so much harder to get hold of photos. Photographers didn't want to release their photos and send them around the world, whereas now you could turn up to a race and take 1,000 shots and it doesn't cost you any more than taking 1 shot. Whereas with film, it cost you.
Yeah.
It was just unbelievable expense for the film and the developing. So people can take 1,000 shots and they can get 20 good ones, and we only need 15 for a feature. So that makes it, we've benefited from that. And people get in touch with us. We've got quite a footprint on the web and on social media, and people still like seeing their stuff in magazines, so there's a benefit to that. And maybe I should say, before we get too deeply into it, we are flat track focused, but we don't just do flat track. We do bits of adventure bike, road trips and street trackers and cultural stuff, film and photography and art as well.
Yeah. No, I love it. And our coffee shop, I probably have about 6 of your magazines, and we leave them at the coffee shop for people to read, along with like Iron and Air and Meta and a few others. But people love your magazine, at least our coffee shop patrons do, because I think what people gather from it is it's a mix of, the old school cycle world where it was all CCs and displacement and, kind of, going over like the components of a motorcycle. And it's also a little bit of like the meta kind of magazine where it's a lot of artsy kind of stuff, but you kind of mesh the two. I think you found a good middle ground of a little bit about the bike and the builder itself, but a lot of really good photography that combines with it. And I know for, myself and the people that visit my shop, kind of the younger market, they love that kind of aspect to motorcycling and the view of motorcycling. You know what I mean?
That's great to hear. Very encouraging, because sometimes it can be a lonely business over here, not knowing you make this magazine and you put weeks and and months into it and then release it. And in the days of blogs, we used to get a lot more feedback. It's strange, it's so much easier to feedback now.
Yeah.
But in the days of blogs, because people felt, I think, so isolated that they wanted to
connect.
They wanted to comment and they wanted to be a part of something. Whereas now, it's that much easier to know that you're part of a scene or part of a crowd, or to find out information, or to put your own culture or opinions out there. It's
sure.
And taste rather than opinions. There's a lot of these curated feeds where people are taking a nice old photo or a picture of a street tracker they like and just reposting it almost as if to say, this is what I'm about, this is what I like.
Yeah.
But there isn't a lot of depth to it, and sometimes I just feel burnt out by the onslaught of imagery, and that's where magazines can still do a job, I hope.
Yeah, well, I know, you might not see it where you're at particularly, or even in England, but at least here in the Southwest, there's a really cool resurgence of young, we're doing our best to push it forward. We're fighting tooth and nail, Steve and I here, at, keeping the community kind of going with the help of a lot of other businesses and partners too. But there's a good resurgence, I think, we're starting to see, of young scrambler builders, desert racers, and flat track riders. And it's, when we first got into the business of it all, it was all cafe racers, and then kind of a transformation started to hit where it became a lot of, restoration projects. And now it's starting to go back to that early version of On Any Sunday, where we're starting to see a lot of scramblers and flat track. And to be honest with you, in my opinion, I love it. This might be my favorite time of motorcycling right now, because these are bikes that are not only purpose driven and aesthetically pleasing, but they're bikes that we actually love to go out and race. So you're getting the best of both worlds, I feel like, right now, which is amazing. It's a great time. It's not just building the cafe bike or the old Triumph or BSA and just looking at it. Now we're going to put these bikes to the test. And there's a lot of people here in the US that are doing the exact same thing. So, it's not falling on deaf ears.
Competition and, participation in events is a really wholesome thing to do. As long as things go wrong and you can hurt yourself and hurt yourself badly, obviously. But that adds to, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. That's what I often say.
Yeah.
And think. But, the participation, whatever it be, that was another thing about Sideburn, that we try to keep the macho out of it, really. That there's too much, for me, there's too much machismo in a lot of motorcycling, and it's not my scene, really. I like that a load of women have started turning up and started racing, because it just brings a different feeling to a race pits. I've never been a motocross racer, and it's not really my scene. I've never been into it. But flat track's always been really friendly and remains to be really friendly. And the amount of times I've heard from people coming from other disciplines coming to the races and just saying, this is great. This is so much different to how it normally is in a pits.
Oh, for sure. Even here with our track here, we probably are, Fem class is probably just as big as most of our other classes at times. Even Steven's wife, who's been riding for a year now, maybe two?
A solid year.
Yeah. She wants to get into flat tracking too. Yeah. So, this sport bit me, and it bit me harder than I think motocross did when I was a kid. And I love it. And I love the fact that your magazine is out there promoting it in such an aesthetically pleasing way.
Well, I got a question for you. I'm going to step back just a little bit because you touched on it for a second, but the feedback that you said you used to get from blogs immediately, and now with the magazine, it's probably a little bit less. What is the feedback that you're getting? I'm curious because you're doing something a lot different there in the UK than I think most writers there expect, but you're also dealing in a culture, a subculture, like cafe racers, that's a little bit smaller than the adventure bike riding. I know adventure bike riding in Europe is huge, but you're in a subculture there that you're sort of promoting. What has your feedback been like? I'm curious.
It's a hard one to answer for me, really, because I don't really dwell on it too much. It's great to hear people loving the magazine, but it's hard to get the magazine. You've got to go to our web shop, send us the money, and then wait for it to come in the post. Well, not many people like doing that anymore. So anyone who does that, we are absolutely in love with. I'm going to answer this in a sort of roundabout way.
Sure.
I don't want to. I'm not bigging myself up or anything, but I've been doing this a long time, and I've seen things coming on the horizon, and I knew the cafe racer thing was going to be big way before it was, but it didn't occur to me. It did occur to me, but I didn't act on it to make a cafe racer magazine, because I didn't want to make a cafe racer magazine. It wasn't my passion. I wanted to continue with this, and sometimes if things are going hard, or prices are going up, or postage prices are going up and squeezing us harder and harder, because we can't keep passing on those increases, otherwise no one would afford to buy the magazine. So we have to keep nibbling it away at our end. So there are times where you just think, I could be doing something else at the moment. But I remember going to Japan a few years ago to see the big, one thing was to see the big Moon Eyes custom show, Yokohama Hot Rod and Custom Show. And also Brat Style were organising a dirt track race over there. So we went to an amateur dirt track race. So I could go to that as well and kill two birds with one stone. And seeing Japanese craftsmen working in tiny little cramped shops, just doing the very best that they could do, which is the very best in the world, but not getting rich and not having a huge plate glass fronted shop like the American way of doing things is look super professional immediately, get your merch line sorted out, get your website and all your socials absolutely nailed, and have the best Mercedes Sprinter on the biggest wheels and the chunkiest tires and the best graphics, and that's how you launch. Whereas the Japanese just go, no, this is it, this is all I do, I'm going to put 100,000 hours into doing this, and all I'm going to concentrate on is this one particular kind of bike. And I came back thinking, oh yeah, there is some nobility in, or a lot of nobility in, ploughing this quite lonely furrow of being an English magazine obsessed with an American sport that happens in the middle of the night, 8,000 miles away, and just keeping on at it and working all the angles to make sure that you can keep doing it. So the feedback is people keep buying it, people keep buying our merch, and that's it, enough of the good feedback for me, really.
That's amazing. And if it's any consolation, you got a few coffee shop dirt riding motorcycle loving guys here that really dig the magazine, and we try and share it with as many people as we can. I think we're going to try and carry it in the shop, and
Indeed.
And we'll have at least the people that enjoy what we do come in, and hopefully they'll partake in what you're offering there as well.
Yeah, well, that's great, because when the magazine started, I had no idea how I was going to sell it. And I think back now, and I was so naive and just excited and wrapped up in it all that I just thought, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get it off my chest. Never thinking that I'd do another one or what would happen. We didn't have a web shop. People had to send us personal checks. It was so strange. And then through the internet, people got wind of it, because it was a magazine before it was anything else. It was a magazine before we had a website, before we had a blog, way before there was Instagram was on most people's horizon, or radar, should I say. We just did this magazine, and then they all turned up and thought, wow, what am I going to do with them now? Because there was nowhere to sell them. There were only 20 people in the UK doing it, and even if all of them bought them, I'd still have a garage full of magazines at home to deal with. And then, when I think back, I just think I'm glad I didn't think about it too much, because there were 100 reasons not to do it, and only 2 or 3 to do it. And now it's got to the point where American Flat Track, the pro sport, are happy to say that we're their official magazine, and happy for us to say that we're aligned with them, which is amazing, really, when you look back at where we started and how it all started. And also that we haven't changed our principles, and we haven't gone super corporate or kowtowing to anybody. We still do as much about the also rans and the losers and the amateurs from Japan or Italy or Spain or Wales or wherever it might be. We give them the same amount of respect as we do Brian Bowman or Jared Maes.
Right.
Yeah, the pros. Yeah.
Super cool, man.
Well, we appreciate it, and we love this magazine. We love everything you guys stand for. And like Steve said, we're going to be really excited to carry it at the shop. So thank you for...
That'd be great.
Yeah, thank you for giving us your time. And I know it was kind of hard for us to link up, being that you're in the UK and we're here in lonely little Albuquerque, New Mexico, but I'm glad you're able to give us some of your time. Before we end this, is there anybody you want to thank or give out any shout outs for people that helped you along the way?
There have been so many people who've helped us along the way that I'd like to thank them all, and anyone who's ever bought a magazine from us, thanks for supporting an independent. And if you go to any of the AFT races this year, their booth will be stocking it. And if there's anyone listening who wants to find out more about it, just go to sideburnmagazine.com. And if you email us, you get straight through to me, the editor, the founder, and we do our best to reply to everybody.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to put all the links when this episode comes out.
Thanks very much for your interest, and thanks for your time as well. It means a lot that people still want to ask us questions.
Yeah, we're old school, man. We still like the tangible old things. So
yeah, we have vinyl records and old magazines and books all over the place.
Excellent. I hope I can make it through New Mexico. I've been there once, but I'll try and make it back one time.
Yeah, please do. Come by the shop, man. We'd love to have you.
That'd be great.
And even if you get out here to do a race or two, I'm sure we could find a bike for you to run.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah. Thank you, man.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Gary. Have a great evening.
So again, great podcast. Love this magazine. Love this publication. I wish I would have discovered this early on. But, it's never too late. And I can't wait to get a few of these magazines at our shop. Maybe get a few of these for sale. Maybe be a regular stalker. What did you think about the timeline, Steve, with the UK and Flat Track?
It was interesting to me because I got to admit, when I first heard of Sideburn Magazine, I assumed it was an American magazine at first because it had so much American-based material in it: desert racing, flat track racing, scramblers. So when I realized that it was a UK magazine, it got me thinking, well, that's kind of odd, because usually when you see a UK magazine, it's cafe racers or it's vintage BSAs or Vincent's or, a British or European motorcycle magazine. It wasn't. It had such an American vibe to it. And I think it related a lot to our DIY style of the coffee shop. It had this real kind of, eclectic, do-it-yourself vibe to it, which I really liked. Plus it's put together very well. So it had all of these elements that appealed to me from a design standpoint and a motorcyclist standpoint. Sure. And I know you liked it right away.
Right.
You dug it when you saw it.
Well, speaking from a design standpoint, does it make sense now that it's coming from England as you look at it now?
Well, after speaking with Gary and hearing his story, it makes sense to me now, because he is such a student of flat tracking and dirt bikes, that it makes sense that he would want to put his passion into the magazine.
Sure. And he's been, in publication for 20 plus years.
Oh, his experience for sure.
Right. So you can see that experience come out. So again, great magazine. I'm glad we had him on here. It's always good to get a historical stance and standpoint from other places outside of our little niche here.
Out of our bubble.
Yeah. For sure. So speaking of which, the bubble is getting bigger and bigger. At the coffee shop, we've been busier and busier every single day, and that's not even including, this is kind of our downtime.
Yeah.
So
I thought it was our downtime.
Yeah, I was expecting it to be our downtime, but it's not. So our shop has been busy, which is good, and we love our customers, we love our faithful, and it's going to get even busier in the next couple months as our Cars and Coffee dates are out there, along with our Moto meetup dates. So those are on our social medias, and you can see all the dates. Again, second Sunday for cars, fourth Sunday for motorcycles, and those are going to be continuous no matter what. So those are going to be big events, big days. Hopefully everyone got their stuff in their garages ready for the meetups this year.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to those. On top of that, our YouTube channels are really starting to take off, and we're coming down to the last episode of the season.
Yeah. That's weird, isn't it?
Kind of, yeah.
It feels strange to be saying we're talking about season finales of a web series we didn't even know was going to come out the way it has. It's weird. I don't know.
Well, I mean, we're shooting stuff now for stuff that's going to come out next season.
Sure.
So it's kind of odd to think about. It doesn't seem like it's been a year that we've been in the coffee shop. And then, again, like our last episode, which is going to be a great episode because it has kind of the cliffhanger for what happened at the last race of the season. It doesn't seem that long ago. That was our season episode, and that all those things happened.
That's what I mean. I mean, it seems weird that we're wrapping up a season that happened a year ago and getting ready for the next one.
Yeah.
It's weird.
It is kind of weird. But things move fast when you're staying busy and having fun. So again, I'm having a blast with everything that we put out. Speaking of which, people can go check out some of these episodes and get sneak previews. Mm-hmm. That's something I didn't know about before that we kind of set up, Steve. How does that work?
If you are a Patreon sponsor at our Patreon site, which is patreon.com. If you don't know anything about Patreon, it's a way to support your favorite artists or programs or independent filmmakers. It's a really great program, and you can go to patreon.com, type in Rust is Gold Coffee, and what it allows you to do is support us, our hosting, our production, because Thaison and I do this out of our pocket, basically. We don't have any major sponsorship. We've got one or two local sponsors that help us with a few things, but we basically cover the expenses of producing all this stuff ourselves. So you can contribute as little as $1 per episode to $40 if you feel like it. And we have some great sponsors right now. We have Chuck Brannon in Wyoming. We've got Mel Whitaker, who supports us. We've got Danny McClung, and we've got a few others that have committed to continually supporting the podcast. So if you'd like to do that, we're offering now like sneak previews to episodes that we're producing, or behind the scenes footage, or I think swag, right? We're going
to start putting out some swag. We might do a special ride day for Patreon supporters. So if you have a motorcycle and you want to come, and we'll do like a kind of a one-off moto event, moto ride.
Thaison will buy you lunch.
I'll buy you lunch. I'll let you ride my flat track bike.
There you go.
Steven will let you ride his road racing bike. And
Shoot, let's do it all. Become a Patreon sponsor. Look at that. Look at all the things.
Look at all the perks you get.
Yeah. So anyway, it's a great program. A lot of podcasters and artists use this around the world. So if you feel so inclined, please check it out. We'd appreciate it. Bonus content, and you get early access to things, which is really cool.
Cool. Speaking of early access, we have a benefit drink. One of our baristas who was with us earlier before and then stepped out for a little bit and then is back, named Mia. She is going to be doing a drink special, which is kind of like a tea infused kind of drink, which is going to be new for us because most of our specials are always coffee based or espresso based, but this is going to be great because it's for the summertime. So a nice summer blend tea, which is going to have some infused fruit. So that's going to be our next benefit drink, and she's going to be kicking off the benefit months again. So we'll be starting that up again. And then I'll let you guys know in the next podcast who it's going to be benefiting because she's still trying to get confirmation on that. Any new gear or swag, Steve?
Yeah, we got some new stuff that I'm really excited about. This is something I've wanted to do for a while. We're shop shirts, mechanic shirts, and Thaison was on the fence about this, but I think they're going to be cool. It's got our logo on the back in a new design that our buddy Daniel, Barista Buddha Daniel, came up with, and it's a cool little Southwest influenced racing design on the back of the mechanic shirt, shop shirt, and then we've got overalls with the same design on the back, which are our pit crew overalls or shop overalls. What do you think? You like them?
No, totally. I love overalls. I'm an overall guy.
You are an overall guy. Do you like the design?
The design's great. I think Danny's really pumped. Because this is his first one that's going to really make a shirt. So
yeah.
It's overalls are cool too. I mean, it's really going to tie it all in. We have like a vintage look. So again, if you want to take a look at that, that's going to be on our Instagram and socials.
Well, thank you. That's the podcast this evening. We really enjoyed talking to Gary at Sideburn, and visit our website at rustisgoldcoffee.com. That's the official website of the coffee shop. Links to our merchandise as well, so you can check out the coveralls and the shirts. Visit our rustisgoldracing.com site. That's the official podcast site, so you can go back, listen to all of the podcasts. You can see photos, and there's embedded video there from our YouTube series now as well. So the benefit of going to the website is you've got a lot of links to a lot of different sites. We also have our YouTube channel, which is YouTube/RustIsGoldGarage. But if you search Rust is Gold Coffee, Rust is Gold Racing, anything Rust is Gold is going to pop up, and we've got some really good content. And that is our show tonight. Thank you very much for listening. We appreciate you all. Ride safe, and we will see you on the next ride.
Down the way, not too far, an old-time rockabilly coffee bar. Record machine tucked in the back, Elvis singing about a Cadillac. I'm on a BSA, been riding all day. Leathers on, goggles too, triumphant, I don't know what you wanna do. My baby's on a Vincent, has been for quite a while. She said it's rocking just her style. So let's ride, so let's ride, so let's ride. Come on, turn up, I got lovely Kims. American rocker is a matter of fact.